So I have a presentation that I am doing for the first time today. Really happy to have you all here. I see some people that I recognize, so appreciate everybody joining. Let's do this first. I want to make sure that we talk about the sponsors for this event. I'm very appreciative that ProductCamp Austin exists and has sponsors, and Pragmatic Institute, University of Texas McCombs, 280 Group, and Norris at the bottom. I believe there might have been another one as well that should be on the bottom. So if I need to mention another one, somebody send me a Slack message. But those are the sponsors. Very appreciative that that they do sponsor this event. So check them out. Here's what we're going to talk about today. Horizon scanning. Okay, so the first time I heard about horizon scanning, I was at a transportation conference about 10 years ago. And somebody got up from, I think, Virginia Tech and started to talk about this kind of concept. And I was fascinated and I looked into it a lot more. There's some things online you can find about it, but they're kind of bits and pieces. So this is a pretty unique topic that we'll be discussing today. So horizon scanning is a technique for detecting early signs of potentially important developments through an examination of threats, opportunities, trends, you know, what you know about the world, all of that sort of thing. Okay, if you're in product, a product manager like yourself can use horizon scanning to analyze what features would mean to the most, what would mean the most given several different possible features for your organization. So, so keep that in mind. I think that like a lot of what we're talking about is some high level strategy. It's some business strategy here today, but it definitely gets into a tactical kind of element as well. You'll kind of see that. Note, I am going to be showing Excel in this presentation. If that triggers you, just know I'm going to show some Excel. That's part of the presentation here. So about me, I appreciate you reading my bio there, but you know, high level, I work at a company called Bottom Line Technologies, which is out of New Hampshire. And I see at least one person from my team actually is here, Isaac. So appreciate some of the people from Bottom Line joining, but we are hiring. I put some jobs in the Slack channel if you guys want to look at them. And again, this is my 8th presentation for ProductCamp Austin. In the old days, I live in Utah. So in the old days, I would actually fly to Austin and stay overnight and do a presentation. And one of the people that I used to do that with was Dave Mathias, who's in this presentation as well. So that's a little about me. Okay, so let's talk about futures and how do you define what the future might be? Okay, so I'm going to take you through a thought exercise. This is not going to be a presentation on COVID, but a couple of slides I thought might be nice ways to trigger this kind of thinking. Think back to February 2020. Okay, so I worked at a company right before COVID shut down everything, and you know, I had some perceptions about what the world was. But think about from your perspective, and go ahead and put this into the Slack channel if you'd like to discuss this. But for your company, what stopped dead in its tracks when COVID happened? Again, I had to like cancel flights. I was flying to visit customers in Dallas, Texas, and I had to cancel them because they weren't allowed to go into the office. So that was me personally, but I'm interested what you all experienced back then. Think about it from this perspective. Did your company's customers change their behaviors too? Did your competitors change their behaviors? A lot of things happened there, but I want to take you back to how unpredictable it was in February. So if I was thinking what the future might hold back in February 2020, I would have thought, given what I was reading about COVID, and I was reading about it, business travel would slow down for a while. The government might fund biotechs for vaccines. Doesn't necessarily impact, you know, my product, but you know, that's an assumption there. People might increasingly wear masks like they do in Asia. Restaurants and hotels will probably slow down for a while. You know, an infectious disease out there, people will stop going to McDonald's. And then like, think about WeWork. Like, well, I would think WeWork might suffer. They also might benefit, but this was kind of what I was thinking back then. So do you guys remember what happened after COVID happened? So here's a summary. Employees increasingly work from home. Parts of the restaurant and hospitality industries shut down. COVID forces a halt to airline travel. No toilet paper for some reason. Hospitals become fully booked. Because of that, elective surgeries become impossible. Vaccines are starting to be developed. The president, do you guys remember this? The president got COVID and took a joyride around and waved at his supporters when he got COVID. Nobody could have predicted that back in February of 2020. And then the last thing, billionaires want to go to space. So here's the only things that back then I could have possibly predicted. These three, but there are three. And back then, if I was really trying to think about how my product might be impacted by COVID, I could perhaps start to think about what these three things were. Now, I would have been thinking about a lot of other things because I didn't know the future, but only three out of this long list actually were probably predictable at the time. So let's take a little step back. So your product fits into a future you don't control. That's one of the general elements here. So take a step back from COVID. We're not going to talk about COVID anymore. You guys can message in the Slack channel if you like, but take a step back. Let's talk about your product and your competitors, your product health, your customers, et cetera. We're going to look at a lot of different elements of what the future might hold for your product and where your product fits into the world. So how can you best form a strategy around what you know as a product manager? Because you're researching the world and your customers and your industries and that sort of thing. So that's what we're going to kind of focus on. And this is where I'm going to start to go into the tool that I'm going to present today. So let's say that I have a successful invoice product and I'm creating a 1-year plan for it. The biggest driver for what I do is how competitor X performs in the market. So I'm trying to keep in line with my competitors and perhaps get ahead of them, that sort of thing. That's probably my biggest driver for success. So also there just happens to be something, and this isn't true about my company, I'm just making it up, but let's say that my company has some lawsuit out there about something that has to do with that competitor, and that affects how things might play out in the future. Okay, so I'm just using this as kind of a high level example. So, so what I do then, and this is where the Excel comes in, is if you look at this little table here, what I'm doing is I'm identifying 5 futures that might happen. They're the 5 columns there in the graph there, and 7 features I want to consider against those features. So the features are dashboard analytics reporting, configurable workflows, et cetera. And my futures are 10% market share for my competitor, 30% market share for my competitor. Lawsuit, gets settled and we win. Lawsuits get settled and I lose. That sort of thing. So in the second row, the blue row, what you're seeing there is I'm going to assess what the likelihood of each of these is. So back to the unpredictability of the future. I'm going to assess which of these scenarios is the most likely, and I'm going to show you how to do that as well. On the third row, and this is the row where the green and the orange exists there on the slide, I'm going to plug in values of 1 to 3 for each of the futures and start to do some math around this. So I have a likelihood of a future, and I want to see how how it would be perceived in that future if I had done that feature. So just going out like a year from now, I want to see like what difference it would make if I did this feature versus this feature, given what the future might hold for me. And the far right is I just take a sum of all of those things, and I have kind of a rating there. So what you see there in this example, which is totally fake, overall necessity, I have dashboard analytics and reporting as my most useful feature given all of the features that I could possibly have. So that's kind of how you do that assessment. Okay, so again, for that competitive analysis example, we considered 3 different potential market shares for competitor X. So notice there, I made several different possibilities out of that. The most likely possibility, if I look at this, is probably the 30%. You can kind of see that I've said that it has the biggest blue line under it. But I also considered, what if it's below that? What if it's above that? So I picked 10%, 30%, 50%, and that's kind of how I'm assessing those. But I also did the 2 different possible outcomes for the patent lawsuit. There's probably more than 2 possible outcomes, but I put 2 different things in there, and that's how I figured out those futures. Okay, so let's get away from my kind of rudimentary example. And I want to look at how you might do this for your particular product. So think about it from this perspective. If you know from looking at a report that your average deal size for your product is $50,000 per year, maybe you pick 3 possible futures: 30K, 50K, and 70K. And it's plus is what I'm saying there. So if everything is just the same as it is today, and it just goes on like it does, then it's 50K, right? But maybe you're getting smaller customers. Maybe your pipeline is full of, is actually increasingly having smaller customers. Maybe your marketing team is appealing more to bigger customers. Maybe, the lack of events in the world makes you start to think, well, actually, I'll probably just be doing online marketing, that sort of thing. So knowing about those trends, maybe you decide to say, the likelihood of each of these is, the most likely thing is the 30K. We go down market and our pipeline is actually smaller customers than today. And the least likely is it's bigger. So I assign some values, 3, 2, 1, right? So what I do there in my Excel spreadsheet is I plug those in, and that's where you see this one's the most likely, this one's medium, probably likely in its own way as well. And then the least likely is it goes to 70K, right? So I start to plug those in and Excel starts to work its magic. Okay. So let's look at something else to add to this possible futures, because I don't know that 3 futures is enough for me to do an analysis of all of my features. What if you tried number of customers on your churn list? So you have a whole bunch of customers, hundreds of customers maybe, and right now you have 15 customers that are considering leaving you or have indicated they're going to leave you. So what happens if you start to analyze that and you say, a year from now, I expect that number goes down, I expect that number goes up, knowing what you know about your business, knowing what you know about, customer life cycle, that sort of thing. So what you could do then is you could say, okay, right now it's 15. So I want to analyze whether it goes down to 10, whether it goes up to 20, whether it stays at 15. So knowing what you know about your trends, and you happen to know something very valuable here, that number might go up over time. Your competitor might be invading your market, that sort of thing. So you say, actually, most likely a year from now, I'll have 20 customers on the churn list instead of 15. So now you assign 3 for the 20, 2 for 15, and 1 for 10. So you add this to the spreadsheet, right? You look at the spreadsheet, and what you start to see there is, okay, so what you're saying is it's a likely future that your deal size might go down and that your churn list might go up. Not a great sign for the health of your product, that sort of thing, but you're being a realist. And so now you're going to analyze features against those possibilities in the future. Okay. However, there's an infinite number of possible futures, as we saw with the COVID example. There's things you could never have imagined, right? So these are some recommendations on some things that I've used in the past for, analyzing the possibilities of the world a year from now, 3 years from now. Think about it from this perspective. What if you did number of partners interested in integrating with your solution? Number of just deals in the pipeline. Maybe that goes up, maybe that goes down. What about how customized your customers are? Are they getting away from your product because they're doing customizations? What about, X number of customers sold a particular feature? And then the last one I think is a really good one to think about. What about your technical debt of your product? Is it going up? Is it going down? Have you been kicking the can down the road for a while, and in the next year, technical debt's going to become a crisis where it isn't today? Things to think about there. So all of those are, possible things that you could consider to put into those columns like that. And I see Roger's comment there. I'm going to read it in a second. So something to think about, and you guys can put it into the Slack channel if you like. What are some other features that would make sense for your product? And also, what is your product? Given that we're kind of short on time, put it in the Slack channel and we can discuss it there. Roger asked, am I gleaning correctly that Horizon Scanning has two primary components: discovering opportunities and trends and evaluating possible futures? Yes, I think that's right. And I'm going to focus a lot more on one other aspect of this in a second, which is the actual features, the actual options that you have and how they fit into this equation. So nice way to transition to that. Okay, so now we're going to look at the features on the spreadsheet really fast. Okay, so that's when you look at the dashboard analytics and reporting, when you look at configurable workflows, that sort of thing. So I've got all of the features defined and how likely they are at the very top. So now I'm going to consider, what about these different features? And I'm just taking some ones at random. So if you look at the dashboard analytics reporting role, maybe you assume that your larger customers would want analytics more than smaller customers. From my experience, that's a safe assessment, right? Larger customers want reporting, want analytics. Maybe you also assume that your customers that are already with you, that they expect analytics, and the lack of analytics is generally causing churn. Think about it from this perspective. A year from now, you have more customers on churn. What if you didn't invest in analytics and you already know that your customers want analytics? That would probably be a bad decision, right? So it would actually be more valuable for you to invest in analytics, given that you actually have already stated you think more customers will be on churn. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate away. I'm going to show you Excel and how this plays out. That is the screen I want. Okay. This is that spreadsheet. So keep in mind, up here is just where I put my 3, 2, 1 as far as what is the likelihood of each of these features. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say what I just said: dashboard, analytics, and reporting. What is the value of that given these features? So I said it's most likely that my bigger customers are going to need analytics. So I said I'm going to do 1, I'm going to do 2, and I'm going to do 3. Okay, what you're seeing there is that it is the most likely feature is it's a smaller customer base, but it's going to be more valuable for bigger customers in your pipeline. Okay, what I also said is, let's assume that your customers are valuing the analytics as is, and you already know that. So it's going to be more valuable for you to invest in that. So I'm going to put 1, 2, 3. And the way this starts to play out is you kind of see this is one of the most likely features. This is one of the most likely features. And this feature, the best play is going to be this one, right? So what you start to see is the value is kind of going in one direction on these 3 features and one direction in these 3 features. So if I start to, go in and I put in some other values for the next feature, and I say, actually, this one will be 1, 2, 3. And it works a different way. And maybe I say, actually, no, configurable workflows not valuable for any of my customers. So I'm going to put in a 1 for each of these. Then what I'm starting to see is, okay, overall necessity, what you're seeing is the dashboards are a better play for these features. Okay. Let me stop sharing and go back. All right. So when you start to go through this exercise, what you see is that going through the features that we had here, your sheet starts to look like this. So notice that when I did this exercise in full, what I found is that OCR actually came out the highest. How did I get it to come out the highest? I put 3, 3, 3, 3, 3 all the way through. By the way, you can do this on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 to 4, 1 to 3, 1 to 10. You can do it any way you want. But if I do that, then you kind of see where something bubbles up to the top. Okay. How should you pick what goes into your feature rows on this? So start to think about it from this perspective. You can have a simple feature list like I just showed, but you can also think outside of the box. Maybe you're doing more of a business strategy assessment. Maybe you actually think you want to make some recommendations on teams and staffing and things like that around that. So what if you used initiatives, investments, removal of features, end of life campaigns? What if you did all of that on this kind of thing? You could do that. It doesn't have to be just a feature analysis tool, but for product managers, feature analysis is probably the easy way to do this. So again, an infinite number of things to consider as features or initiatives using this method. But here's a few examples. Sunsetting a feature, sunsetting your entire product, focus a Scrum team on something, a particular expansion or a particular feature. Partner with your competitor. That probably is not going to happen, right? But maybe you consider it, maybe that's something you want to look at. And, maybe if you're being really, really strategic, maybe you're thinking about acquiring a company. What about if you switch something so that right now you're using Tableau and you go to Power BI, something like that. What if you go after a new vertical and you change your marketing habits? So again, putting this out there, put this in the Slack channel if you like. What are some other features or initiatives that would make sense for your product? And if you like, what is your product? I see a couple people typing. Okay, so how far should you all take this? You can take this pretty far. This is where like you really, if you're doing this kind of analysis, you're really trying to consider all your options. You might be in a bad state if you're doing this kind of analysis, or you might just be in a state where you're starting from zero on this. I think it's a great time to do a really thorough analysis when you've just shipped an MVP. That's a great time to do it. Another great time is when you're even considering to build the product in the first place. So, I mean, I'll show you how deep this can potentially go for a second. And again, I've blurred out what the features and futures are because it's not really relevant to this exercise. But what you can see is like you could do two different likelihoods. You could be analyzing at the same time for 2022 and 2024. And you could be doing a huge list of features. And you could be doing a huge list of futures. And what you start to see is, okay, if you start to have that stack ranking, like it really starts to influence like how you might, decide what to do here. And it might be a really good thing to show your executives about what strategies you're kind of considering for your product. So with that, I'm going to start to wrap it up. Okay, other tools to consider for this. Horizon scanning is not for everything. It also might break down as you're doing it for your particular needs and exercise. So here's another way to do it. RICE, really good way. A lot of you have probably used that. That's a good way of kind of putting numbers on two different options, just like horizon scanning is. Another one, WSGIF. Okay, this one, weighted shortest job first. This is a good one. I see a lot more like agile minded people, scrum masters, engineering managers using this kind of way as well. So this is another really good way to do prioritization. And then, one thing that you can do with RICE, with WSGIF, with horizon scanning, you can put it into like a Moscow, a must, should, could, kind of analysis of what you want to do based upon this analysis. So a thought for you, And I'm going to open it up for your comments at this point, because we have a few minutes left. So take yourself off mute. What other tools have you tried like this? What are some thoughts, some questions, some observations that you have about the exercise that we did today with horizon scanning?
Hey Matt, this was awesome. This is Tim who I really love the new tool, and I haven't heard of it. Maybe it's been around, but I love the idea of kind of balancing future with kind of the actual work and feature. This reminds me a lot of like a weighted scorecard.
Yep.
I don't know if you've seen that before, but yeah, so it reminds of a weighted scorecard, which kind of has the same challenge of like the scoring could be somewhat subjective. You know, maybe
yeah.
from, yeah,
Definitely.
yeah, right. Exactly. Your marketing person and your head of engineering might disagree on how important or how likely something is. So have you dealt with that scenario, and how do you navigate kind of the people element of horizon scanning?
Really good question. I do not recommend doing it as a group exercise. I recommend doing it as an individual exercise. And this is your thoughts on this kind of topic. And maybe somebody else does an individual exercise on their own as well. You can totally cook the books here. You can do it with rice, as you know, as well. Yep. You can do it with WSGIF. I've seen people literally take the formula out of the cell and just put 100 on it. Like, I've seen people do that kind of stuff. But if you're analyzing a lot of things, it becomes more hard to argue on what you're kind of coming up with, because you're sort of seeing your good ideas float to the top and your bad ideas, well, not your bad ideas, but your less important ideas, your less beneficial ideas float to the bottom. So I think that it's, again, it's a kind of a recommendation thing, and it's a conversation starter. And if you start to think about it from that perspective and sort of test your hypotheses with your other stakeholders, that's a good way to do it. Again, do not recommend having 4 people look at a spreadsheet and assign values together. I've never seen that work very well. I think it's more of an individual exercise.
Thank you.